So during Clinton's second term, we're talking mid 90s, 94, 95, um, the tech industry booms, and that will essentially lay the groundwork for the world we're living in nowadays. So, including in that technology umbrella is the internet will boom during this time period, as well as personal computers. So, no, not looking up stuff on your smartphone, an actual desktop computer that will streamline a lot of businesses, a lot of record keeping, as well as entertainment. We'll also see the development of cell phones and pagers. Can you imagine living in a world without a cell phone? I briefly lived during this time period. And one thing that is not important to us today is PDAs. Personal digital assistants. We have everybody's contact information on our cell phones. We can look up their addresses on the internet. Back in the day, that was not the case, and therefore, sorry, that's my dog. um, Keeping up with people's personal information, home telephone numbers, addresses, business cards was difficult. A lot of people had little books that they kept in their purses, little black books. But now we can do that digitally and store a lot more information in one small little handheld thing. Nowadays, we do that on the calendars on our smartphones. But that was a huge technological innovation for especially those in the business world. On the internet, it's not just business stuff. You can shop on the internet. Email was a huge development, instant communication that's not talking on the telephone. Computer sales will skyrocket, and we'll see the people in the tech industry becoming billionaires. But one issue that brings up is how much power does the government have to regulate what you say on the internet? It's kind of a free speech sort of debate that starts during this time period. So because of the technological innovation, we get an economic boom in the 1990s. Huge, huge consumer boom. We have a government surplus going on. So it's a great time to live in the United States. So a huge people buying a lot of stuff, consumerism, low unemployment, inflation has finally been broken. And due to Clinton's economic policy, we will have a government surplus. So here's some of the technology developed during the time period. The PlayStation, which I knew and loved, handheld Game Boys, the PC, and this is what a personal digital assistant was, a Palm Pilot or a Palm Centro, where you could have your calendar and people's contact information all at the touch of a button instead of looking through a phone book or looking through all your files at work or something. And of course, a little pink cell phone up in the corner. My first cell phone was a Nokia. It was a hand-me-down from my mom. So those are just some of the tech innovations during this time period. Most famously during Clinton's presidency is the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and there she is in the top right corner in the 90s with that great 90s bang going on. So in the midst of this, the Clintons, Hillary and Bill, are already being investigated for a real estate scandal called Whitewater. It's not super important. If you're interested in it, go look it up. So they're already being investigated, and essentially a White House intern, Monica Lewinsky, is talking to a friend of hers, Linda Tripp, I believe. Yes, Linda Tripp. And amidst all this scandal with the real estate, Linda Tripp will videotape their conversation, and in the conversation, Monica Lewinsky claims that she is having an affair with Bill Clinton, and there will be multiple conversations that are taped, and a dress with evidence found on it. If you want to go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, just look up the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And Clinton will be, the House will vote to impeach him, and in this impeachment trial, the Senate will vote against removing Clinton, saying that there are no grounds for his actions actually being a high crime or misdemeanor against the United States. So he wasn't in trouble for having an affair. Tons of presidents had had affairs before, almost all of them. He was more in trouble for perjury. In the Senate hearing, he said, oh, here it is, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Well, I guess he botched the definition of sexual relations or just flat out lied about it, and that's why he was being put on trial for the lying of the Monica Lewinsky scandal, not so much the actual scandal itself. But essentially, he was only the House voted to impeach him. He was not impeached. He was not removed. The economy was still good. His approval rating was still high in the midst of all of this. But it is mostly what we remember when we think about Bill Clinton. So moving on into the 2000s, and this is when you guys were born. Most of you guys were probably born during the very end of Clinton's presidency or George W. Bush's presidency. So when I say 2000s, I'm encompassing 2000 all the way up until like yesterday. So we have Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump within that. So first is George W. Bush. He is the son of George Herbert Walker Bush, the president before president number 41, and George W. Bush will be president number 43. But there is controversy amidst the way he is elected. We'll get to that in a minute. During his presidency, we're going to see a huge spike in globalization. And here's what globalization means. It is technological, political, economic, financial, and cultural exchange between peoples and nations that have made and continue to make the world more interconnected. So that was a textbook definition of globalization. It basically means the world is now our community, not just the United States. And essentially that is because of the technology that was opened up to the United States and the world in the 1990s. So increased trade, increased investment, easier currency exchange, meaning easier travel between countries. Corporations that are multinational. There is a Hilton in almost every country in the world. There's a Walmart in almost every country in the world. And also the spread of new culture and ideas. People will be opening up their eyes and their ideas to new things that they have been seeing on the internet or seeing when they travel or seeing in the news. We're becoming, during this time period, and even now more so, becoming a more interconnected world and not just focused in on ourselves. Part of the reason behind this is the promotion of NAFTA, the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement between Canada and Mexico. So the controversy behind this, like I talked about with Clinton, was yes, it removes the barriers to free flow of people, goods, ideas. There's better trade, better currency exchange, better investment, better migration. But is that detrimental to American jobs if we send them overseas? Is it detrimental to other countries who we're not paying them a living wage? Is it detrimental to opening up doors for terrorism, which will become a thing during the United States? I'm sorry, during the United States, during George Bush's presidency. Is it adversely affecting immigration? It opens up further immigration issues, especially in modern times in Donald Trump's presidency with building the wall. So the whole idea of globalization and NAFTA is essentially controversial because yes, we're opening ourselves up to good things, but many people fear we're opening ourselves up to bad things as well. So the controversy behind George W. Bush's presidency is that maybe he wasn't supposed to be president to begin with. And I'm not saying that because I don't like him, because I love George W. Bush. But in the election of 2000, so George W. Bush, he's governor of Texas. He is from Texas, but he was educated at Yale and then Harvard Business School, I want to say. And he is the son of George Herbert Walker Bush, our 41st president. And up against him is Al Gore, a Tennessee senator, and he was the vice president under Clinton. So let's find out what happened in 2000. Essentially, we have pretty much a tie, and America goes crazy overnight because of it. If you see, the electoral votes are basically split down the middle, as are the popular votes. So here's the trouble with it. Gore will win the popular vote by over 500,000 votes. Sorry, I was looking at my numbers there, but over 500,000 votes. So he's tipping the scales that way. And he tips the scales on electoral votes. So 270 electoral votes are needed to win constitutionally. Bush gets 246 and Gore gets 255. Neither of them technically won because popular vote doesn't matter. Electoral vote is what matters, and that's the way our government was established. So what do we do? Essentially, the issue behind it was Florida. It all came down to Florida that had 25 electoral votes, as you see right there. There was disputes over the voting mechanisms. This was before electronic voting in some places. So we get what's called a hanging chad, which is going to be a great Halloween costume. I might show you guys later. And it's with voting, with punch voting. It's when you punch, that's who you're voting for, right? Well, if you see in the top right corner, they made little nicknames for, oh, is it fully punched out? So did they really vote for this person? And because there's such dispute over this in Florida, Gore will request that the votes be hand counted. So it's in the morning of the next day. We're supposed to know who is the president. It's still coming down. Votes are still being recounted in Florida, and Gore demands that the votes be hand counted. Well, when we go to when America is asking, well, who's going to be president, essentially it makes it to the Supreme Court because George W. Bush will challenge Gore's demanded hand count of the Florida votes. And so they take it to the Supreme Court, who will then look at the constitutionality of the subject, and Bush will be awarded Florida's electoral votes because in the pre-counts, that's what he had won Florida. And there was controversy because his brother Jeb Bush was governor of Florida, and what if it's all a scandal? And the recount was halted. The original ruling that Florida's electoral votes all went to George W. Bush was held up, and George W. Bush will be president. I love this cover of Newsweek. It was published afterward. It takes Al Gore and George W. Bush's face and morphs it. And the winner is, some people think that this was essentially rigged because the voting in the Supreme Court was along partisan lines except for one vote. But I like to trust that the Supreme Court went with what the Constitution said. So the number one important event that's caused all the other issues we're going to talk about on George W. Bush's presidency is 9/11. And some of you guys were alive for 9/11. I was in first grade in 9/11. And I do remember it just because it was so scary to Americans. It was so scary to me. My dad was a police officer, and he was called to go there after the attacks. So this is probably, I hope, the number one thing that I will remember when it comes to American history in my life. Like, where were you when 9/11 happened? So essentially the story behind 9/11 is terrorists affiliated with Al-Qaeda and on the orders of Osama bin Laden will hijack 4 planes. 2 of them will be crashed into the Twin Towers in New York City at the World Trade Center. A major target because of businesses, because of schools, because of lots of things going on there, foreign dignitaries. 1 plane will be crashed into the Pentagon, and 1 plane that was headed for Washington, D.C. was diverted by some very heroic passengers and crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. Almost 3,000 Americans were killed and 6,000 of them wounded. Many of those in both totals were first responders on the scene in New York City. Horrific, horrific time period to live in New York City and have to come to terms with what had happened and how many people had died at the hands of terrorism. So because of 9/11, it just sets the stage for all of Bush's 2 terms. And he will declare a global war on terror, and this is just like a symbolic declaration against terrorism, saying that America will not tolerate it and will take actions against it, and they do. During George W. Bush's presidency, Congress will declare war in 2 different places, one of which is Afghanistan. So in Afghanistan, hold on, let me find it in my notes here. Yeah, the Taliban is ruling, and the Taliban is more of a related to an Islamic state, and they're a terrorist. They lean towards terrorism, and because of that, Al-Qaeda kind of finds a home within Afghanistan underneath the Taliban. And the goal of the war in Afghanistan is to invade, depose the Taliban, and get rid of Al-Qaeda. But essentially, it's kind of seen as a failure because Osama bin Laden will escape and will not be captured during George W. Bush's presidency. Later on in March 2003, the United States invade Iraq, and this is what is known as the Iraq War, the war in Iraq. And Saddam Hussein is the dictator, and there had been issues with Saddam Hussein in previous presidencies, especially in George H.W. Bush's presidency. And the mission of this was to get Saddam Hussein out of power. And U.S. intelligence within the country said that they had weapons of mass destruction.